Lately, there have been studies looking into the efficiency and effectiveness, and indicators are we're not getting the results that we desire. It seems like what's happening is the diligence programs are not properly addressing the risk of using a third-party service provider product in the customer environment. The third-party service providers' risk management processes are not being considered, and the appropriate amount of diligence is not being provided. So this talk today is going to take a look at some of my observations in regard to how we're handling third-party due diligence and make some suggestions on how we might make some changes to that. So I'm Patrice Coles. You can get in touch with me over LinkedIn or on Twitter. Basically, in my background in the industry, I used to drive a firewall for a living, long time ago. And then I kind of went into IT audit and controls, and I started working at a small managed security services provider that had a lot of customers that were in the financial industry, which actually worked to my advantage because that industry is kind of at the forefront of these diligence efforts. So I got exposed to the FFIEC and the OCC, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, early on. And so I've been able to kind of watch the things unfold a little bit over time. I now work for another services provider, and I do handle diligence questionnaires daily. So it's pretty much part of the job for me. Does anybody remember OCC Bulletin 2013-29 from October of last year? Basically, the nice people at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency took a look at the financial institutions who were doing diligence efforts, and they came back and said, you know what, guys, you're not cutting the mustard. The bottom line here is you can outsource the execution of a service, but guess what? You still own the risk. So there's no way around it. The baby is yours. He may be ugly, but you still got to deal with him. So step it up. So a few of my observations in light of that, just based on what I've seen day to day, and this is supported by the information that the studies have produced. A lot of the DDQ, due diligence questionnaire processes, are not very proactive. A lot of them tend to be historically focused. They tend to be framed in an antivirus, IDS, kind of a hardware assets, scanning sort of a framework, which is not really necessarily applicable, especially to certain types of services. New technologies do not tend to be very well addressed or very promptly addressed, and they tend to rely a lot on third-party assessments. Some other things that I've noticed, questioning in terms of ongoing competence of that third-party service provider. They don't seem to provide a lot of follow-up. I see a few companies doing follow-up, but not a whole lot. If there's a new vulnerability that's coming out, do you know whether your service provider's platform would be susceptible to it? And if it would, are you asking them that question? If you don't know what published diligence is available, call up your customer service rep and ask them. Hit up your vendor's website. If they can provide that information to you, I can tell you I have a data center that they just put it out there every year. I don't even have to bother them. I just go look it up and I see, are they PCI compliant? Yes, as of when? Do they have an SSA 16? Yes, as of when? ISO compliant? Bam, bam, bam. You're done, I'm done. We're all happy. So take advantage of that where it's available. Evolve the process. Okay, review and testing. Testing is something that needs to be done with great consideration. In my opinion, I recommend, before you ever do the test, consider what outcome you expect it to provide. And then check for variances to that. Making sure when you're setting up testing that it is hitting on all of those areas that your risk management program dictates. So check it point by point to ensure. Because if you just do a test that somebody set up somewhere and it doesn't really apply to you, well, you prove that you can pass the test, but so what? Auditing and monitoring, same thing. Weighting and measuring. Ensure that follow-up is done in the time frame that's needed, and make sure that you are monitoring what you need to be monitoring. Another thing that you can consider with evolution, okay, so I really can't get my hands around it the way I want to. How do I really get a true feel for this? Maybe you want to look at agreed upon procedures and on-site assessments. Now, not all service providers allow them, and maybe yours do or don't, but it is an avenue, and it may be something where you say, hey, I want to come spend a day or two with you. I want to see it working. I want to ask you questions. I want to look at how it functions and how your people drive it in your own environment. Scoping. Oh my God, scoping. So this is, in my opinion, one of the largest problems. We drive the bus into the canal very quickly here on scoping. And it's so critical. It is the baseline. It's the framework for understanding everything about how that product fits into your environment. So if you miss the bus on the front end, everything else is going to give you skewed results. So what do you need to do? Well, first of all, you want to get an understanding of the service. What type of service is it? Is it a hosted data center? Is it an ISP? Is it content delivery? What is that service and how is it going to function and how is it going to introduce risk into your environment? That should be a back and forth collaborative conversation between the customer and the vendor. A lot of times I don't see that happening. A lot of times people hand me their stuff and say, go for it. Again, okay, fine, but you're asking me to do your scoping on the hoof. Considering the fact that I don't know anything about your environment, or maybe I do, but I probably don't know as much as you do you really want me to do the scoping without talking to you? Because if you just give me the questionnaire, that's what I'm going to do. Okay, I got time, I got to get this finished, done. Understand the service, obviously the objective of those items. Applicable questions. So now we've got the scope. Now we understand the service. Let's go through our pool of questions and say, hey, which ones really matter here? How many of these do I really need to be asking? Which ones can I leave off? Which ones are pertinent? Assess only what matters with the appropriate measures and weights according to what your business's risk appetite is. So check boxes and SIGs, use them where they're feasible. There are certainly places where it's a great tool. If I have a portal and my portal can say to you, hey, your PCI compliance was valid as of 6/30/2013, do you have another one as of 6/30/2014? Yes or no? Or maybe. Then that's a great way to use a checkbox or a SIG. Do what it takes to get the most bang for your buck. So Are you asking the right questions on that questionnaire? The standardized assessments, good starting point. It'll give you a giant pool of questions if you just want to go pay enough money to get them. But whittle them down. Hone them to be what you need to be. Not only that, don't just whittle them down. Ask yourself, what other concerns do I have that I may need to add to this? Take into account your scope. So that's going to tell you, based on my conversation with my vendor, I probably need to look at these things, and I probably don't care so much about these things. Apply the same principles of your own risk management program, and if you have a risk register, you can even put this on your own risk register, because A, we already said the ugly baby is yours, you might as well own it, and you're tracking it in exactly the same way, you have exactly the same visibility. Yeah. Review frequency. Again, how frequently do you need to take a look at that diligence? You may have pieces that break out. I see it annually most of the time, but sometimes annually is not a good answer. Sometimes you need to be following up more frequently, and sometimes less frequently, depending on what it is that you're looking at. Quantify. So most of the time, when I'm filling out a diligence questionnaire, I see something like this. And this is going through and saying, okay, this is how close you are to getting the question done. And I'm watching them tick up. 60%, 70%, 80%, 90, 95, 98, 102. Some of them actually go to 102. Okay, well that's nice. So that told me, that objectified, that gave me a very quantifiable target of getting it done. Is that really what you want me to target? I would propose something that I would love to see. If I had a customer that gave me a diligence questionnaire, and instead of the percentage complete, I had the Psychometer. Tell me how my product is comparing to your expectations.
They jigger the sheet for it.
Pardon?
I've seen this. They jigger the sheet to get the right answer. You cannot give that to them up front.
Well, and obviously you may have to work with the provider to get to this, but I can tell you from my perspective, this would open my eyes. Now as I'm going through and answering those questions, I'm going to be looking over here to say, ooh, epic fail. What was wrong with that? And if I see a lot of stuff that's heading over here to the ugly zone, maybe that tells me that my scoping discussion was not so successful. Or maybe that tells me that my questions, your questions, need a little polishing. Tools are good. Okay, you just told me tools were bad the last time. Make up your mind, right? Here's the deal. Yes, tools are great for what they're good for. Automated processes, absolutely. Send me that portal every year that says, are you still PCI compliant? But keep in mind what they're good for. Calculations, that's another thing. That's a thing that tools are fantastic at that I don't see them used a lot for. So all of this risk modeling, all of the profiling to determine if the risk that's associated with that project falls within your variances, that's a great thing for tools to do. I don't want to sit there with a calculator and figure all that stuff out. Give it to Siri, let her do it. Follow-up, regular follow-up, a good thing. But again, don't let Siri drive. Only the human should drive. Somebody needs to interpret that. Somebody needs to understand what it means and make the right decision. Okay, standard diligence questionnaire case study. So I had a customer who sent me a questionnaire. Had about 500 questions. They asked for about 20 additional artifacts. And, of course, it was improperly scoped. Oh no. So what happens? Time goes by and everybody's happy initially, and then their regulators showed up. And they asked some questions, and because they didn't truly understand the way the product worked, they gave the regulators a wrong answer, truly a wrong answer. And really, it just was not the way the product worked. So the regulators, they smelled a little coffee, and they came back and they said, hey, let me ask you a couple more questions. So the questions went from them back to us. We gave the answers, and they said, oh, no. No, that's not at all how we perceive this to work. So now what happens? The regulators are there. We're under duress. We've got to recomplete our scoping exercise, start all over again. There were rounds and rounds of questions back and forth. They were grilling us like a barbecue in July. Honestly, at some point you say, look, it'll be less painful if I just go ahead and gnaw my own arm off. So it worked out in the long run. After a lot of pain, we finally got to the game, because then they had a great understanding, thanks to the regulators, of how the product worked in their environment. And now we work pretty cooperatively. They tend to pick something new each diligence effort to focus on, but they are also very good at leaving out the stuff that just doesn't matter anymore, because they already know it doesn't work that way. Hard way to learn the lesson, though. Takeaways for the service providers. Try to make things self-serve while you can. If you can put it on your website, great. If I have to have a scoping discussion every time I am talking about a specific product, then maybe I need to go ahead and just put that together into a document that I can give out. So I can say right off the top, here's your reading homework. We're going to discuss that on a conference call if we need to. Okay, granted, you can't make people consume that, but somebody who really wants to provide a viable diligence effort, they're going to be able to take advantage of that. Publish what you can. If you are PCI compliant, you can say, yes, I'm PCI compliant as of this date. Maybe you can't give all the details of your rock, but give them what you can give them. Help your customers learn. You're sitting on a wealth of information. You know what everybody asks. Maybe you can tell your customers that. Now, granted, again, maybe everybody's asking stupid stuff that makes no sense. But in that case, go back to them and say, all right, I just need to understand why the turnstile matters. And if everybody's asking about it and it's not stupid stuff, now that's going to tell you, hey, drive that back into my documents, drive that back into my scoping discussion. Customers, conduct that initial risk assessment as part of your vendor selection process. If you're doing it afterwards, you're already too late. Ask yourself iteratively, how can I make that third-party service provider risk management better align with the business strategy and effectively manage the risks in my environment? Ask yourself, how can I make that process more efficient and get better value out of it every time I do it? Don't forget, you can outsource the execution, but not the responsibility. You still own the risk. Seek maturity in your program. There are vendor management maturity models where you can go evaluate your program, find out where it falls on the scale, and it'll give you suggestions of how to mature it. Or a lot of this stuff is common sense, but look for that. Evolve, take out the questions that don't matter. Start following up as follow-up is required. And that's my presentation for today. Thank you for attending. Does anybody have any questions? Questions, comments, suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, we go through this a lot, or I go through this a lot. A couple things that I do is, you're talking about being proactive, and when I get one of these questionnaires, it's usually coming through a program manager for that customer, and I'll get that program manager like, look, just get a phone call together with them and their auditor that's asking for all this stuff so that I can talk to them. And that saves so much time.
Absolutely.
I mean, sometimes it's 5 minutes looking off, and that's all it takes. And the auditors are like, oh, I get it now. And then lots of things go away and change.
Yeah. That is a prime example of scoping right there. Other questions? Judy?
Yeah, I can bring in the vendor perspective for national companies, and I wasn't exactly on the other side. I can tell you, 1 out of 10 vendors is capable of answering even a simple questionnaire. We started with open questions, like
right.
They're not capable. Yeah, now this is a sales guy, or sorry, and the other is the thing that's from the customer perspective. When they start to negotiate contract and whether it's product, and shortly before they sign the contract or afterwards, hey, we missed someone, the security guys. How can you quickly look at them and found out that whether they get a decent tool to find follow?
Of course.
But what I wish, if someone on the vendor side, like in your very last slides, you basically exactly, someone, as a vendor, you know your product. You know the most common questions. Sometimes there are external standards like PCI, and you know what the customer is asking for. Prepare documentation and cover the most common questions you would get. And from my perspective, when I got it, when I see there's a level of maturity and I get some answers, then I rest my case and I say, okay, they're mature, I don't have to worry.
Right, now you can sleep at night.
I got bad answers, no answers, and then I start digging, and that's what you see. Then it gets nasty because then I'm poking you around asking the same questions, and this will take me most of the time.
There you go. They're going to pull me off here with the big cane in a minute. I can take some questions at the end, like in the back, if you guys want to continue discussion. I'm kind of getting the... follow me on LinkedIn or Ursula Miner on Twitter at BabyBearSec. Thank you for your time.